Before you assume you know what kind of story this is, wait. Because what happened backstage that afternoon was not what anyone expected, including the father. Before the taping started, before the lights came up and the music hit and the audience rose and Steve Harvey walked out in the suit his stylist had pressed that morning, before any of that, a man named Calvin Reese was sitting alone in a green room in Atlanta, Georgia, holding a photograph with both hands. The photograph was of a boy. The boy was 8 years old in the photograph, which meant he was 8 years old right now, today, because the photograph had been taken 6 weeks ago on a Tuesday by Calvin's sister Tamara on her phone and sent to him through the prison's approved photo service, which processed images in batches and delivered them on a rotating schedule so that a photograph taken on a Tuesday might not arrive until 3 weeks later, which meant that the boy Calvin was looking at was always slightly in the past, always a version of his son that had already grown into something else by the time the image arrived. Calvin Reese had been released from Hays State Prison in Tryon, Georgia, 11 weeks earlier. He had served 6 years of an 8-year sentence for armed robbery, a crime he committed at 23 years old during the worst period of his life, a period he did not excuse and had stopped trying to explain, and had instead spent 6 years doing the work that the explaining had been avoiding. He was 31 now. His son Marcus had been born 4 months before Calvin went in. Marcus had not known a version of his father that was free. The Reese family, Calvin's mother Dorothy, 62, his sister Tamara, 35, his cousin Jerome, 41, and his Aunt Bee, 67, had applied to be on Family Feud 8 months before Calvin's release date, because Tamara had decided it was what the family needed to mark his coming home. She had not told Calvin. She had simply done it, the way Tamara did most things, with complete confidence that the decision would reveal itself to be correct in time. The casting team had called. The taping date had landed, by a coincidence that Bee insisted was not a coincidence at all, but was in fact evidence of something she had been praying toward specifically 14 weeks after Calvin walked out of Hays State. What Tamara had also not told Calvin was the other thing. The thing she had arranged with the production team 3 weeks before the taping, in a phone call that had lasted 40 minutes and during which she had done most of the talking and had not cried until she hung up. She had told the production coordinator exactly one thing that she needed to happen, and the coordinator had said she would see what she could do, and she had called back 2 days later and said it was arranged. Calvin did not know Marcus was going to be there. Marcus had been raised by Calvin's mother, Dorothy, in the house in Augusta where Calvin himself had grown up. Dorothy had done this without complaint and without ceremony, the way Dorothy Reese did everything, with her sleeves rolled up and her calendar organized and her faith sitting somewhere close to the surface, but never worn as performance. She had taken Marcus to school every morning and picked him up every afternoon and helped him with homework at the kitchen table and explained his father's absence in the language of 8-year-olds, which meant she had said, "Your daddy made a mistake and he is fixing it." She had said this consistently, without variation, for 6 years, because she believed that the consistent sentence was kinder than the complicated one, and because it was true, and because Marcus deserved a truth that left room for the future. Marcus had asked, twice, whether his father was coming back. Dorothy had said yes, both times, without hesitation. Marcus had accepted this the way children accept things when they are told by someone they trust completely. He had gone back to his homework. What Dorothy had not told anyone, not Tamara, not Calvin, not her own sister when they spoke on the phone on Sunday evenings, was the cost of the particular vigilance required to raise a child whose father is incarcerated in a world that has opinions about incarcerated fathers and their children. The teachers who looked at Marcus's file and then looked at Dorothy with a particular expression she had learned to meet with a particular steadiness. The other parents at school pickup, who sometimes said things they thought were quiet. The forms that asked for parent information and the small recalibration Marcus did every time he encountered one, looking at Dorothy, waiting to see how she wanted to handle it, which she always handled smoothly, which meant Marcus never had to feel the friction, which meant Dorothy absorbed it entirely herself. She had been absorbing it for 6 years. She had never told Calvin. He carried enough, she reasoned. He was doing the work. She would carry the outside of it, so he could carry the inside. This was the lie she permitted herself. Not a lie exactly, but an omission so complete it functioned as one. On the Sunday calls, she said things were fine. They were fine. They were also more than fine was designed to contain, and she said fine anyway, and Calvin believed her because he needed to, and she let him believe it because she loved him, and this was how they got through 6 years. The production coordinator had not told Steve Harvey about Tamara's arrangement before the taping. This was intentional. The coordinator and the supervising producer had discussed it and agreed. Steve needed to encounter it the same way the audience would. Anything else would cost the moment something it couldn't afford to lose. The Reese family played the first 2 rounds with the focused, slightly frantic energy of a family that has been waiting a long time to do something together and is not going to waste a second of it. Dorothy, calm and precise. Tamara, fast and occasionally too fast, hitting the buzzer on instinct and then working backward from the instinct to the answer, which succeeded more often than it should have. Jerome had 2 answers that were so specific and so correct that Steve Harvey turned to the audience and said, "How did he know that?" B answered one question about baking with 4 consecutive correct answers that accounted for every item on the board, which had never happened in Steve's 8 years hosting and which he announced as such. Calvin played with the quiet intensity of a man who was doing something he had imagined doing for 6 years and was aware at every moment that he was doing it. Between the second and third rounds, Steve did the family conversation segment. He sat with Calvin. He asked the standard questions. "How long have you been out?" 11 weeks. "How does it feel?" Calvin paused and said, "Like everything is moving faster than I remember." Steve nodded. He said, "What do you want for your family?" Calvin said without any hesitation, "I want to be there, not for the big things, for the regular things, the regular Tuesday. I missed all the regular Tuesdays." The studio fell completely silent. Steve looked at him for a moment. He said, "You have a son." Calvin said yes. He said, "How old?" Calvin said, 8. He said, "Does he know you?" Calvin looked at his hands briefly. He said, "We're working on it." He said it simply, without asking for anything from the sentence, just the truth of where they were. Working on it. Steve nodded slowly. He said, "How long since you've seen him in person?" Calvin said, 11 weeks. He said he had seen Marcus twice since his release. Once the day he got out, when Dorothy had brought Marcus to the prison gate, and once 2 weeks later at Dorothy's house for Sunday dinner. He said, He stopped. He said, "We're figuring out how to be around each other." He said, "He looks at me like he's still deciding." The studio fell completely silent again. Steve Harvey looked at Calvin Reese for a long moment. He turned to the audience. He turned back. He said, "Stay right here." He said it quietly. He said, "Don't go anywhere." He walked off stage. The audience did not know what was happening. The floor director, who knew exactly what was happening, kept her face professionally neutral by an effort of will she would later describe as one of the more difficult things she had done in 9 years of live television. The Reese family at the podium, Dorothy, Tamara, Jerome, Bea, held their stillness in different ways. Dorothy folded her hands. Tamara looked at the floor. Jerome put his hand on Calvin's shoulder. Bea looked at the ceiling, the same place Iris Beaumont had looked. The same place people look when they are talking to someone who isn't in the room. Calvin was looking at the stage door. Steve came back through it leading a boy. The boy was 8 years old. He was wearing a blue sweater and sneakers with a logo on them that Calvin did not recognize because he had missed the years during which that logo became the important one. He was holding Steve Harvey's hand and looking at the audience with the wide, slightly overwhelmed expression of a child who has just been walked from a quiet backstage room into a room with 400 people and a lot of lights. Then he looked at the stage. Then he looked at the podium. Then he saw his father. The studio fell completely silent. 400 people, all of whom had been making the ambient sound that 400 people make, shifting, breathing, the small continuous noise of a room full of human beings, went completely silent at the same moment, which is a thing that happens so rarely in a room that size that 2 audience members would independently describe it, in interviews months later, as the most surprising sensation they had ever experienced in a public space. Not the emotion, the silence. The physical fact of 400 people choosing quiet at the same instant. Marcus Reese walked across the stage. He did not run. He walked with the particular dignity of a child who is feeling something very large and is not sure yet what it requires of him. And he walked to the podium, and he stood in front of his father, and Calvin Reese crouched down to his son's level, and put both hands on the boy's face, gently, and looked at him. He didn't say anything. Calvin Reese, who had spent 6 years learning to say the hard things, said nothing. He just looked at his son's face with his hands on it, and Marcus looked back at him, and whatever passed between them in those seconds was not available to the room or the cameras or the 400 people who were holding the silence like something fragile. Then Marcus put his head against his father's shoulder. Calvin closed his eyes. Steve Harvey, standing 6 feet away, was not performing anything. A camera operator named Darius said he had his lens on Steve's face, and Steve was not managing his expression the way he managed it on air. He said, Steve looked like a man in a church, a man who has shown up somewhere and understood, on arrival, that the thing happening here is larger than him, and he is grateful to be in its proximity. Steve said, quietly, not to the audience, not to the camera, to Calvin, this boy needed his father. He said it like a fact, like a thing that was true before today, and is still true, and will remain true. And the saying of it is not an accusation or a comfort, but simply a witness. An acknowledgement that the need was real, and the years were real, and the boy standing with his head on his father's shoulder is real. And all of it happened, and now they are here. Calvin nodded against his son's hair. Dorothy Reese, at the end of the podium, was not crying. She had decided, somewhere in the last 6 years, that she had done too much of that alone, in private, on Sunday evenings after she hung up the phone, and that today was not the day for it. Today she stood straight, with her hands folded, and watched her son hold her grandson, and her face held something that was not quite a smile and not quite tears, but was somewhere between them. The expression of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and is watching the patience become the thing it was for. But Steve wasn't done. He waited until Calvin and Marcus had separated, until Marcus was standing next to his father at the podium with Calvin's hand on his shoulder, before he spoke to the audience. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." He said, "I know what some of you are thinking." He said, "I know because I have thought it." He said, "The years are the years, and the harm is the harm. And a moment on a stage does not undo 6 years of a Tuesday that a boy did not have his father for." He said, "I know that. But I also know that the alternative to this moment, the world in which Calvin Reese never comes back, never does the work, never walks out of that gate, is a world with a different kind of damage in it." He said, "What you are watching is a man deciding who he is going to be for the rest of it." He said, "That is not nothing." He said, "That is, in fact, everything." He looked at Marcus. He said, "This young man is going to know his father." He said it with the quiet certainty of a statement rather than a hope. The opposing family, the Washingtons from Charlotte, who had played with tremendous warmth all afternoon, had not moved from their podium. The mother, Celestine, 48, raised her hand. Steve nodded. She said, "My father came back when I was 12. She said, "I know what it is to be the child who is deciding." She looked at Marcus. She said, to the 8-year-old, in a voice she steadied carefully, "It gets easier to decide." He looked at her. He nodded once, solemnly, the way 8-year-olds nod when they are taking something seriously. But Steve wasn't done. During the commercial break, he had spoken with the foundation. When the cameras came back, he announced that the Steve Harvey Foundation would be covering 12 months of family counseling for Calvin and Marcus. Weekly sessions with a therapist who specialized in parental reunification after incarceration. Because, Steve said, the work that Calvin had done on the inside was the first chapter, and the work on the outside was where the book got written. And books like this one needed the right kind of help. He also announced that the foundation had partnered with a re-entry employment program in Augusta to ensure Calvin had a pathway to stable work. Because stability, he said, is how a Tuesday becomes regular again. How a father gets to be there for the regular things. The studio fell completely silent one last time. The clip went up on a Monday. 31 million views by Wednesday. 58 million by the following Monday. The Reentry Employment Program reported a 43% increase in donation volume in the 2 weeks following the clip's release. 3 separate family reunification nonprofits cited the clip in fundraising materials with the family's permission. A comment from a man in Detroit. "I have a daughter I haven't seen in 5 years. I don't know if she'd let me. I'm going to find out." A comment from a woman in London. "My father came back when I was 10. Nobody talked about the deciding. I've been deciding for 30 years and I didn't have a word for it until now." 3 months later, Calvin and Marcus Reese had completed 11 counseling sessions. The therapist told Calvin in their 9th session that Marcus had said, when asked what he liked about coming, that he liked that it was just them. Just him and his dad, in a room, with no one else. Calvin had written this down. He kept it in his wallet. A year after the taping, Calvin was employed as a warehouse supervisor at a distribution center in Augusta that had partnered with the Reentry program. He coached Marcus's recreational soccer team on Saturday mornings, a job he had applied for himself by walking up to the coach and asking, because he was trying to collect regular Tuesdays wherever he could find them. Dorothy watched the games from a folding chair on the sideline and brought a thermos of coffee, and did not say much and did not need to. Today, Marcus Reese is 9 years old. He calls his father every evening at 7, a habit that started when Calvin suggested it 2 months after the taping, and that Marcus has maintained without being asked. Which Calvin knows because Dorothy told him. And Dorothy told him because she thought he should know, and she was right. The calls last between 4 and 11 minutes, depending on whether anything happened at school. Calvin saves the long ones. Some distances are not measured in miles. A father can be 30 miles away and absent, or 300 miles away and present, and the difference is not geography. It is decision, made daily, made in the regular Tuesday, made in the soccer practice and the 7 o'clock phone call, and the wallet with the small folded piece of paper that says he liked that it was just them. Calvin Reese missed 8 years. He is not getting them back. He knows this with the clarity of a man who has spent 6 years sitting with hard facts until they become workable ones. He is getting the rest of it. He has decided what to do with the rest of it. And a boy who spent 8 years being told your daddy made a mistake and he is fixing it has had the evidence arrive on a Tuesday in a blue sweater under 400 people's held breath, and has put his head on his father's shoulder and is deciding, and the deciding is going the way Celestine Washington said it would. It gets easier. If this one moved you, hit that like button right now. 1 second. It matters more than you know. Subscribe to this channel because every week there is a story that needs to be told, and you should be here when it is. And if there is someone in your life who is trying to fix something, share this with them. Today, the fixing deserves a witness.